Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yongki and I'm a senior associate at Scar Legal PC. Today's webinar will focus on TM visa sponsorship and requirements. I will be covering the first half of the session, and then our firm's another senior associate, Dustin Saldarriaga, will take over the second half. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce our firm and go over a few housekeeping items. We are a full service immigration law firm and we offer services in a wide range of areas, including E2, O1, TN, L1, H1B, any types of employment-based or family-based green card cases. That said, we are especially well known for our external work with the TM visa. And we have built a very strong reputation in this area. We have processed hundreds of TM visa cases. Many of them were complicated and sophisticated. We have worked with many employers who did not have any experience with the TM visa processes. At the end of this webinar, we'll send you several useful tools. A copy of a PowerPoint presentation we'll go through today, a link where you could download guidelines with more details on visa options, a link to sign up for additional webinars, a link to webinar recording on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification button as we regularly post immigration related videos. A link where you can set up a consultation with us also will be sent to you for your any private consultation requests you have. Finally, for any questions, please type them into chat box or Q&A box. We'll address all the questions at the end of presentation. With that, let's get started. So TM visa is probably best working visa for Canadian and Mexican nationals, except for those who wish to run their own businesses in the United States. So let's look at the requirement first. First, you must be citizen of Canada or Mexico, but please note that you do not need to be born from these countries, okay? You just need to have a passport from one of these two countries. Meaning that if you were born in another country, immigrant to Canada or Mexico, you have a passport of Mexico, Canada right now, you are basically meeting basic requirements. Your profession must be one of the listed occupations in TN visa regulations. For this matter, if you are at your computer or if you have your cell phone ready, please go to the Google and type NAFTA, TN regulations, NAFTA TN regulations, or you can simply type TN occupation list, whatever what is convenient for you. You just type in your Google search, then you may click on any link that shows the list of TN visa occupation. Okay. Let me click on the first link came up from my Google screen search here. Once you click on that, you scroll down, you will see a list of occupations that starting with probably starting with A, accountant, architect, and go on. There are about 60 occupations listed. As you can see, even going through, many commonly well-known occupations are listed here. You should also note that there are some professionals are not listed here. For example, a marketing related position is not listed here, such as like a uh, uh, market researcher, or the another position that is not listed is like a financial analyst. Those some positions are listed, some positions are not listed. So you have to know that whether your profession, your occupation that you are currently doing in foreign country is listed in this TN occupation list. So please remember about that part before you apply TN visa. you must also have required qualification to practice the profession. And when I said that you need to have a qualifications, it is not U.S. employers' requirement for the job. For example, U.S. employer may require the job applicant to have let's say 20 years of experience for the particular position, but that's a employer's preference, not the regulations. Okay, so for the TN visa applications, all you need to do is just meet the TN visa's minimum requirements. For example, economist needs, according to this, the TN occupation list you are looking at, economist needs a bachelor's degree or a licenciatura degree. Accountant needs a bachelor's degree or licenciatura degree or CPA license. Management consultant, which is a little more complicated than other occupation, needs a bachelor's degree or licenciatura degree or 5 years experience in the field of specialty related consulting agreements. Okay. Likewise, you have to carefully review which occupation you are going to use and apply for your TN visa, because each occupation has a slightly different way to meet the requirement. Okay. Another requirement is pre-arranged job offer from a U.S. employer. But please note that the definition of employer is quite broad. So it can be solo practitioners. It could be LLC, or it could be incorporations. It doesn't really matter. So as long as the U.S. employers offers you a job, then you can proceed with your TN visa applications. An individual can give you a job offer as well. So when I said the solo practitioners, the solo proprietorship, in legal term we call it solo proprietorships. So the person does not have to have the corporation form to run his own business. Okay. Keep in mind that you cannot use your own U.S. company to offer a job to yourself. Such self-employment is prohibited. Your degree also must match the job description. It means you need to show that you are coming to United States to perform activities matching with your profession, your job. So example is that like U.S. company want to hire you as a let's say social media manager, and you have a bachelor's degree in accounting. In that case, the proposed job duties do not match with your degree, so you may not be eligible for the TN visa. Okay. Well, another example is that, like, let's say they wanna hire you, financial analyst, but you have an accounting degree only. In that case, analysis is a little more complicated, but by looking at only the degree itself, will be kind of more difficult to apply for the TN visa categories, because first of all, financial analysis is not listed. Okay. And you have to apply for the accountants, but there are huge difference between accountant and financial analyst. At the same time, there are some overlapping job duties. So in that case, case analysis will be more complicated. That's why if we have facing that kind of situation, please contact us and schedule the consultation with us. We'll analyze more the details about your case. Next, then how do we know what kind of job duties a particular TN occupation actually perform? For that matter, you should look at DOL's, Department of Labor's Occupational Outlook Handbook. In short, we call it OOH in the U.S. immigration world. If you search a particular occupation from this website, click on and then click on what they do. Okay. You will see most commonly performed job duties by each occupation. Likewise, whatever occupation you are applying, you should always check this website to make sure the job duties you are going to perform in the United States should be substantially matching with the information provided by OOH. Well, Dustin will readdress this OH website one more time when he takes over the presentation later. So it may be a good idea to keep this website open in your computer or cell phones. Okay. Next, then what is sponsorship in terms of TN visa? One of the most common questions we get is whether TN visa requires a sponsorship. So in the US immigration, the definition of a sponsorship often means that the employer need to test the labor job markets, whether there is a US worker willing to take the job, or employer need to pay a prevailing wage, which is a lot higher than the state minimum wage in many situations. The responsibility of sponsorship sometimes even extends to a situation where employment is terminated. For example, when an employer lays off an H-1B employee, employer even need to pay a transportation fee so that H-1B employer can go back to their home countries. Good news is TN visa does not require any of this. For that reason, we could usually say that TN visa does not require a sponsorship. For TN visa, you just need a valid job offer from US employer and sign the letter explaining the nature of position and job duties, employment duration, and salary amount. That letter is not binding. If applicant turns out to be not a good worker, then employer has right to terminate the employee at any time. Employee also has the same right to quit the job anytime if he does not like it. Okay, so basically TN visa workers are almost identically treated as a US worker. The filing can be made by at the port of entry for Canadians and Mexicans. Uh, there are a lot of exceptions that they need to go through, and I'm sure Dustin will mention that what kind of exceptions are. But generally speaking, Mexicans need to submit application to the U.S. Embassy. That's the kind of general rule. But there are slight exceptions that we can address later. But keep in mind that when you are already in the United States, the wish to file a change of status through the USCIS, without going out of the United States, you can still do it. So in that case, you are not filing because you are the just beneficiary about the application submitted to United States. The U.S. employer need to file the application as a petitioner, and once the case is approved, then you will get benefit out of it. That's the process of a U.S. Filing application through USCIS. With that in mind, let me turn it over to Dustin, who will guide you through the next part of our presentation, and who will cover the differences between Canadian and Mexican nationals, as well as some more challenging TN visa categories. So please stay tuned.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Yongki. So I'm really just going to be building on much of what Yongki has already shared. Um, so pardon the repetition, but we'll go into a little more detail. So as Yongki mentioned, the TN is for nationals of Canada or Mexico. You need to hold a passport from one of those two countries. But the procedures and some of the benefits of TN status are different depending on whether you have a Canadian passport or a Mexican passport. So there really are three ways to apply for a TN visa or TN status. Those are applying at a port of entry, applying for a visa at a consulate, or applying from within the U.S. through USCIS. All three of those options are available to nationals of Canada. So nationals of Canada can approach a port of entry, whether that's an airport or a land crossing. They can present their TN application materials, and if they're approved, they will get 3 years typically of TN status while they're in the U.S. They can also go to a consulate and apply for a TN visa. If they're approved, they'll actually get a sticker, a visa in their passport, typically for 3 years. That allows them to enter and exit the U.S. multiple times. The third thing that Canadians can do is they can apply through USCIS, or as Yongki mentioned, their U.S. employer can apply for TN status for them from within the U.S. Usually, this is in situations where the person, the employee, is inside the U.S. So they might have just finished school and gotten a job offer with an employer. Then their employer might apply to change their status from F1 student status to TN status. That's an example. But typically, USCIS is going to change the applicant status from whatever status they have to TN status. Only two of those options are available for nationals of Mexico. Specifically, nationals of Mexico cannot apply for TN status at a port of entry. So they cannot go to an airport and apply there for TN status. They cannot approach a land crossing and apply for TN status. Nationals of Mexico, if they are outside the U.S., their only option is to apply for a TN visa at a consulate. So that is the big distinction for Canadians and Mexicans. So let's talk about a few details of that. Since nationals of Canada can apply at a port of entry, why would they go to a consulate? A port of entry is an immediate decision. It's fairly inexpensive. There's minimal downside. If you're denied, you leave. You can improve the application and apply again. So why would a Canadian want to go to a consulate where you have to file an online application, wait for potentially weeks for an interview? The reason is that U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the border, at the port of entry or the airport, can only give TN status to nationals of Canada. So you need a Canadian passport, as I said before. So if a Canadian national is married to someone who's not a Canadian national, or if they have a child who's not a Canadian national, then they'll oftentimes all go to the consulate together to get their TN, and for the dependents, the TD visas. But other than that situation, we rarely see Canadians applying for TN visas at the consulate, again, because it is just so easy for them to apply at a port of entry. So for nationals of Mexico, they do have a benefit, though, that Canadians don't have, which is they can get a 4-year TN visa. Nationals of Canada can only get a maximum of 3 years on a TN visa. Nationals of Mexico can pay. It's an additional fee, but it gives them a 4-year TN visa. It can be very convenient and prevent them from needing to renew their visa. So we generally do recommend that nationals of Mexico apply for that 4-year visa. Each time a national of Mexico enters the U.S., even if they have a 4-year visa, they're given 3 years of TN status in the U.S., which means they need to leave the U.S. before that 3-year period ends. Again, that's independent of the length of their visa. Even if their visa is 4 years, each time they enter, they get a maximum of 3 years of status inside the U.S. Same with nationals of Canada. Each time they enter the U.S. in TN status, they get 3 years and need to leave before the end of that period, or they would need to apply to extend their status. So for nationals of Mexico, in certain cases, when they apply to renew their visa at the consulate will let them know that they qualify for renewal by mail, which means they don't need to come in for an in-person interview. The consulate makes that decision after the application submitted, after the DS-160 is submitted. One important note on that is that you do need to be in Mexico even if you are renewing by mail. You cannot mail your passport from the United States to the consulate in Mexico, get the visa, and have it sent back to the U.S. You actually need to be in Mexico, mail your passport from Mexico to the consulate, and get your passport back. Fortunately, it does still save you an interview, though, so there is a benefit there. Perfect. So as Yongki mentioned, we're now going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some uniquely difficult TN professional categories. So as Yongki mentioned, the TN regulations are actually extremely helpful, and they're actually quite easy to understand, which is why for the TN, we oftentimes do recommend on our webinars that you actually look at the regulations. We don't do that in many of our webinars for the E2, for the EB5, we're not going to recommend that you pull up the regulations or the law. It can be very, very complicated. But the TN is not very complicated. As Yongki mentioned, if you pull up those regulations, you're actually going to see dozens of professions listed. Accountant, economist, dentist. It really it runs the gamut, but not all professions are included, as Yongki mentioned. Two professions are listed, but they are uniquely challenging. They're really hard to get approvals for. That being said, we do see regular approvals in these categories. It's just that you need to be mindful of what the risks of these categories are. The first professional category that is uniquely challenging is that of management consultant. And the reason that this category is challenging is because it is one of the very few professional categories that does not require that the applicant have a degree, have a college degree, whether that's a baccalaureate or a licenciatura degree. Almost every other profession listed in the TN regulations is going to require either a degree or a professional license, and that professional license itself is oftentimes going to require a degree. So the government knows that if someone is applying for a TN and that person doesn't have a college degree, it doesn't matter what they're going to be doing in the US. They are probably going to be applying as a management consultant because almost every other category, you have to show you have a degree. So it's a catch-all category. Because of that, the government is going to scrutinize the application. They know this is a professional category that a lot of people apply for even if they don't qualify. And so they scrutinize these applications, applications for the management consulting category. So how do you actually get a management consultant TN application approved? The first thing that's important to keep in mind is that there are riskier management consultant applications and there are less risky management consultant applications. Less risky applications are those where the person is a management consultant and they're coming to the US to work for a management consulting firm. So as an example, if a person works for McKinsey in Mexico City and they have an offer to join McKinsey in New York City, they've been working as a management consultant for 5 years, that is not a risky application. Okay? Because again, they're coming to the US to work as a management consultant for a management consulting firm. What is risky is applying as a management consultant to come to the US to work for a company that is not a management consulting firm. As an example, I use this example in the webinars. I think it's helpful to illustrate the point. Let's say that you have a national of Mexico who has a job, who is an expert in the design and manufacturing of solar panels. He has been working in the industry for 20 years and is wonderful at helping companies improve their manufacturing and design processes for solar panels. A company in the US designs and manufactures solar panels and wants to bring him from Mexico to the company in the US to advise it on how to improve its design and manufacturing process. That would be a more risky TN application. The reason is the individual is not coming to the US to work for a management consulting firm. The individual is coming to the US to work for a solar panel company, a company that's not a management consulting firm. So how do you, in that case, structure the application so that it's less risky, less likely to be denied? The important thing to keep in mind as an overarching idea is remember what a typical consulting arrangement looks like, and you want the TN application to look like that. What I mean by that is if a company hires McKinsey to consult for it, then a few things typically exist. First, there's a specific challenge that the company is facing. There's a reason they're hiring McKinsey. Okay, so there's an explicit challenge. There's typically a defined time frame. So they are not going to tell McKinsey, yeah, if you need a decade, take a decade. They're going to say, you know what, we'll engage you for 6 months, we'll engage you for a year, and we'll pay you for that engagement period. So there's a defined period of time. The McKinsey consultant is also not usually going to join the client company as a W-2 employee. They are usually going to continue being a McKinsey employee, and they'll be contracted out, say, to the client company to consult for them. And then the client company will either pay McKinsey directly or will pay the consultant. But again, the consultant is not going to be a W-2 employee and typically not a full-time W-2 employee. So the consultant's not filling a full-time W-2 role at the company. Okay, so all of these factors are really important to reflect in a TN application. Again, when the consultant is coming to the US to work for a company that is not a consulting firm. So in our example, you would typically expect to see that the solar panel company in the US has a very defined challenge. That's going to be in their TN letter. They will say, we're facing this issue. Our manufacturing costs are too high. Our design is inefficient. And we need someone to come in to address that specific challenge. Second of all, it's going to define the time frame. So to address that challenge, we need this consultant here for a year. Okay, and over that year, here's what they're going to be doing in months 1 through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 9, etc. Also defining in the letter how they're going to be paid, how the consultant's going to be paid, typically by their deliverables, not by, say, a regular salary. Next, that we're kind of leading into this point, but the independent contractor role. So typically there is a management consulting agreement between the U.S. company and the TN applicant where it defines, again, that challenge, what the deliverables are, how the consultant's going to be paid, etc. It's a contract. So it's not typically going to be a W-2 engagement. It's going to be, look, we have a contract and we are paying this person as a contractor based on the deliverables that they are providing to our company. Related to that, usually you're not going to see a 3-year engagement. So again, the maximum period of time you can request a TN is 3 years. But for management consultants who are coming to the US to work for a company that's not a management consulting company, you're oftentimes going to want to see fewer than 3 years. So you request a year, maybe 2 years. If you request 3, it starts to suggest to the government officer this might not actually be a consulting arrangement. It might be a person filling a permanent role at this company. Now, the language that you see in the regulations, you see it on your slide, supernumerary. What that means is that that's a role that is not a permanent role. So a management consultant, someone coming to the U.S. as a management consultant on a TN, should not fill a permanent role. They should be supernumerary. That's just the word you see in the regulations. And finally, to take a step back, I didn't explain this before, but again, what I did explain is that you don't need a degree to qualify as a management consultant. What you do need, if you don't have a degree, is at least 5 years of experience, either as a management consultant or in a field of specialty that's related to the consulting agreement. So that's how, in our example, we have a national of Mexico who's an expert in solar panels coming to the U.S. to advise a company that makes solar panels. That person, in my example, I said he had 20 years of experience, so he meets that 5-year experience requirement in the field of specialty related to the consulting agreement, which is solar panels. They're manufacturing their design. To prove that experience, you would need to have in your application letters from your past employers or past companies that you've consulted for showing that you have that 5 years of experience. And those do need to be signed letters from those past employers or contractors. Next, let's talk about the second professional category that is uniquely challenging, and that is economists. This category is challenging for a completely different reason from management consultants. The economist category is challenging because the government issued a policy memo in November of 2017 that narrowed the scope of the category. As Yongki mentioned before, when you're applying to come to the US on a TN, you have to define what professional category you're coming to the US to fill, and your job duties need to be consistent with what that profession does. And when I say with what that profession does, what do I mean? I'm talking about what the government thinks that profession does. What the government, for example, thinks an economist does. So how do we figure out what the government thinks an economist does? Yongki mentioned the Occupational Outlook Handbook, or OOH. That is an incredible resource. It's published by the U.S. Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it actually describes the job duties that the U.S. government thinks that people in dozens and dozens and dozens of professions do. So if you're applying as an economist, you want to make sure that your job duties are very closely aligned with the job duties that appear on the Occupational Outlook Handbook for economists. What this policy memo in 2017 said is that economists do not include financial analysts or market research analysts. Excuse me. So before November 2017, people would come to the U.S. in the economist category, and they would enter and they'd perform the job duties of a financial analyst. Financial analysts tend to work for financial institutions and find opportunities to generate profit from investments, for example. Market research analysts are really helping to focus on how to improve their employers' marketing to hit certain target populations, increase demand, but they really are focused on marketing. The policy memo said if you're coming to the U.S. as an economist, as a TN economist, you cannot work as a market research analyst or a financial analyst. So, in effect, what this means is if you are wanting to come to the U.S. to work as an economist, look at the OOH and what it says economists do. Make sure your job duties are aligned with those. But also look at the OOH for financial analysts and for market research analysts. And make sure that you are not performing job duties for those two professional categories. It's okay if a minority of your job duties are somewhat related to those. That does increase the risk a bit. You certainly don't want a majority of your job duties to be market research, what market research analysts or financial analysts do, though. And again, your job duties have to actually map onto reality. So it's if you're representing in your application that you're not going to be working as a market research analyst, once you enter the U.S., you need to not work as a market research analyst. If you do, that can create significant issues from a work authorization and a status violation standpoint. All right, we can go to the next slide. So we talked about this previously, but let's talk in a bit more detail about what the TN visa application process looks like. So to start, option 1, available only for Canadians, is applying at a port of entry. Again, that could be an airport. That could be a land crossing. It is an option that's only available to Canadians. Nationals of Mexico cannot apply at a port of entry. If you're applying at a port of entry, then you are going to bring with you your application packet, which is going to include a letter from the U.S. employer, the TN employer, that talks about who the U.S. employer is, why they need someone in your position for this TN role, who you are as the applicant, how you qualify for the TN, meaning you have that baccalaureate or licenciatura degree, or you have that professional license, or you have the required experience. Again, that is going to depend on your profession. Certain professions, like an economist, you can only qualify based on a degree. Other professions, like management consultant, you have the option of qualifying based on experience. Certain professions, you can use a professional license, like a lawyer or an accountant. But you need to look at your profession, how you qualify for the TN, and make that clear in the application. Just a quick distinction. The U.S. employer might want more qualifications beyond the TN qualifications. So as an example, the U.S. employer might say, we want to hire an economist with 5 years of experience. That is fine, but that is not how you qualify for the visa. To qualify for the visa, you have to look at the regulations. For an economist, the only way you qualify is a degree. So you want to make clear in that employer letter, this person's qualifying because they have a degree. Because the border officer or the consular officer basically has a checklist. And box 1 is going to be they're applying for a profession listed in the regulations. And they're going to say, okay, economist, check. Next box is going to be they qualify for that profession. And they're going to say, okay, economists qualify based on a degree. Do you have a degree? And you don't want to say, well, I have 10 years of experience. They're going to say, no, you need a degree, so you don't qualify. Make it very clear. You have that degree. Check. It's fine after establishing that you qualify for the TN that you have additional credentials that make you ideal for the job. So after you make clear or the employer makes clear in their letter, this person qualifies based on their degree, and they're a wonderful fit for our company because they have 5 years of experience. That is fine, but don't confuse the two. You want to make very clear to the officer how you qualify for the TN. That is most fundamental and important. So there's that letter from the employer. It needs to be on the employer's official letterhead, company letterhead, with the contact information for the company. It also needs to have the original signature of the person who wrote the letter. In addition, you want to have it in your application packet that you bring with you to the airport or to the land crossing, proof of how you qualify. So if you qualify based on a baccalaureate degree, you actually need to bring your actual degree, the original degree. It's also usually a good idea to bring certified copies of your transcripts. If you qualify based on experience, as I mentioned before, you want to bring letters from past employers with original signatures talking about the fact that you've worked for them for at least 5 years. And if you're qualifying based on a license, you need to bring that actual license with you, like an accounting license or a bar license to practice law in a certain jurisdiction. And of course, you need proof of citizenship, so you need your passport. Next, important to know if you're applying at a port of entry. Some ports of entry are optimized for faster TN processing. So you can find a list of these online. If you decide to work with our firm, we are happy to work with you on that, help you find those. Especially if you're a first-time applicant, it can help to apply at an optimized port of entry. It's always good to call the port of entry ahead of time just to make sure you know what hours they're operational, if they have any unique procedures. And the contact information is on the Customs and Border Protection website. Next, let's talk about applying at a consulate. Again, if you're outside the U.S. and you're a national in Mexico, a consulate is your only option. To apply at a consulate, the first step is filing an online application form called a DS-160. You would then pay the visa application fee. They may schedule your biometrics, fingerprints, and photos. And then you would attend an interview with the consular officer where they ask you questions about your job, your qualifications, etc. If you're approved, they'll keep your passport, put the TN visa in it, give it back to you, and you can enter the U.S. in TN status. And as I mentioned before, sometimes the consulate for renewals will, when you file the DS-160 online, they'll let you know, hey, you qualify to renew by mail. Go ahead and mail in your passport. You must do that from within Mexico. Finally, the last option is to apply from within the U.S. So for nationals of Mexico or Canada, this is typically done. This is an available option if you're inside the U.S. And the application consists of a Form I-129, which is filed by the U.S. employer. You can apply with premium processing, which costs about $3,000. It guarantees a decision within 15 business days. The application packet, I should have mentioned this before, at USCIS is basically identical to the application packet I described before at a port of entry. It's going to be the employer letter, proof of how you qualify, proof of your citizenship. But USCIS will only accept copies, so don't send them originals. At a consulate, I should have said this before, a consulate, the application packet is basically identical to what you would submit at the port of entry. So you need originals of the employer letter, proof of qualification, and of course your passport. All right, we can go to the next slide. So some tips and common pitfalls. As I mentioned, it's always a good idea to call ahead to the port of entry. Make sure you know when they're open, what their hours are, if they have any unique procedures. Next, if you're applying at a port of entry or at a consulate, it is helpful to let the person who signed your employer letter know when you're planning to attend the interview, when you're planning to approach the port of entry, or when you are going to your consular interview. And the reason is that sometimes the officer will actually call that person. The purpose of this is really just to confirm that the job offer is legitimate. It doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes happen. So in an abundance of caution, it's good to ask the author of the letter to be available, have their cell phone on them. Next, bring your diploma, official transcripts, and original signed version of the employer letter if you're qualifying based on education, the diploma and transcripts, and always a signed version of the employer letter if you're applying at a port of entry or the consulate. And this is because consulates and ports of entry, the reason you need original documents is consulates and ports of entry encounter a lot of fraud. And so if they see a copy of a document, they are immediately going to be suspicious of fraud. You don't want to waste your time and be in that situation, so just bring the originals with you. Finally, the TN visa is a non-immigrant visa. It is not a green card. It does not allow you to remain in the U.S. permanently. As part of getting a TN visa, you do need to affirm that your intention is to leave at the end of your TN status. That being said, you can renew your TN visa indefinitely as long as you remain eligible and your U.S. employer remains eligible. So it is okay to renew your TN visa 3, 4, 5 times. What is not allowed is to use your TN visa to come into the U.S. and then apply for a green card. If your plans change, if you enter the U.S., you find you love your job and your employer comes to you and says, hey, I want to sponsor you for a green card, that's okay. It's okay if you enter with the intention of leaving, but then your plans change. That is okay. But the process of adjusting status, meaning pursuing a green card after entering in TN status, is quite tricky. So do schedule a consultation if that's relevant to you. One note on this is that usually in a first or second time TN application, the officer is not going to require evidence of your ties outside the U.S. So you usually don't need to worry about this non-immigrant temporary intent. But if you're renewing 3, 4, 5 times, you may need to show the officer proof of your ties outside the U.S. So that could be bank statements outside the U.S., proof that you own a home, that you lease a property outside the U.S., proof that you have family outside the U.S., etc. Really think broadly about whatever ties you have outside the U.S. All right, I think we got to all of the questions. So please do, if you have questions about your specific circumstances, please do schedule a consultation. Keep an eye out for our email following this, where we have links to future webinars. Check out our YouTube channel, check out our blog, and of course, if you have any questions at all, please reach out. Yongki, thank you so much, and thank you to our audience for taking the time.
Thank you.